Hi, I'm Dante,
And I'm Tommy.
and you're listening to Twigging Onto Twig, a podcast where we talk about Wildbow's most parasitic web serial, Twig.
In today's episode, we talk about Cat Out of the Bag 2.7 and 2.8.
Excellent. I don't think we have any announcements today.
No.
No special guests today, except I do have Basil with me again.
Chewing on cables and whatnot.
Yep, being a little pest, as he often is.
So, I believe, though, before we start, you had promised to do homework for your singing teacher, which was do the voices of...
Are you actually going to have me do that here?
No, it's fine.
You can hear my voices when I finally finish my chapter that I promised for the Pale audiobook.
Which one are you... What voices are you doing? If you're not... I don't know what you're... Or what voices are you supposed to do?
It's an Avery chapter that I'm going to be reading, and I know that a bunch of Avery's family is in it.
So you get to do a Declan.
So I get to do a Declan and a Carrie and...
Pale spoilers, sorry.
Yeah, spoiler, Avery has siblings.
Yeah, other than that, I do hope you have a nice Cecil voice at some point.
A Cecil voice?
Yep, for Cecil.
Fun fact, Cecil is Kimberly Dauber's first attempt at a voice with an accent in this story.
What accent did she choose for him?
I think she was going for a British accent, but it sounds more Australian to me.
I kind of want to listen to that. I'll find a clip at some point. That sounds fun.
Yeah.
All right, so overall, before we get started, I think 2.7 may be my favorite chapter so far.
The one where they're having tea?
Yes, a tea party.
It's pretty intense, isn't it?
It's very intense, and it's very tense, both intense and tense. And I feel like we got a lot of who Sai is at this point, and we also got a lot of genuineness from Mauer. Maybe I'm completely misreading that, but I feel like we got a lot of who he actually is from what he was saying.
Okay, yeah.
But yeah.
I kind of got, well, we'll get more into this later, but I kind of got that he was hiding a lot of who he was in this chapter as well, and putting on a...
Sure.
Everything we saw was a facade, is what I saw.
I agree, but I think it's a facade built on a foundation of, like, an actual bit of righteous zealotry.
Yeah.
Not necessarily religious zealotry, but he believes in his cause, even if he's willing to do, whatever it takes to get there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
All right, so before we get deeper into that, let's go over what happened before and in these chapters. So previously on Twig, the Lambs, plus Cecil and Lacey, went to Reverend Mauer's church as part of a yet-to-be-revealed plan by Sylvester, which was immediately derailed when Mauer recognizes Mary.
In Cat Out of the Bag 2.7, Mary manages to convince Mauer that she is the real Mary, or seems to be able to convince him. Mauer invites them all in for tea and treats. Gordon, Lillian, and Cecil decline politely and leave, but the rest join him in conversation. Unfortunately, they do not learn much about his plans. Mary tries to poison Mauer by putting poison in his tea, but she puts the spoon back in the cup upside down, and Mauer notices. So instead of drinking the tea, he dumps it out and leaves to address the crowd, and Sai starts sending everyone into position. Just as Mauer is about to start his address, Gordon jumps into the church through the window and announces, "The things are attacking!"
Dun dun dun! And Cat Out of the Bag 2.8 starts immediately after 2.7. The crowd starts to panic, but Mauer manages to calm them down. Sai and Gordon work to rile the crowd up while Mauer continues to try to maintain the calm. The Lambs reconvene under a pew, which is an image, to discuss the next steps. Sai wants to get to the crowd to riot. Helen and Sai argue over who should be the next pretend victim. Helen wins, and they pretend the attacking monster is in the church. Meanwhile, Mary goes to cut the power. The crowd is panicking for real now, and Mauer responds by revealing his, maybe, true colors? "The Academy is coming," the shepherd said. "They're coming for us. It was always their plan, and I've been planning how to stop them for some time."
Dum dum dum. I
Again,
just want to
agree.
clarify for people who are not familiar with church stuff. A pew is not an image. We're talking about the image of the lambs under a
Yes,
pew.
correct. Just under a pew. There's not much room under a pew.
Yes, a pew is a bench.
So yeah, just picturing the crowd of them just like hunched over, or laying down. I don't think you could even hunch over under a pew unless they're very small.
Uh-huh. Yep.
Maybe between the pews.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah,
It might
yeah.
have even not been a pew, and I just misremembered it when I wrote that.
It sounded right when I read it, so
Yeah.
I'm going to assume that that's the way it is.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So in terms of plot discussion, there is a lot going on here.
Dense.
Um, and I only just put notes for a couple of things, but I
Hmm.
feel like there's a lot more we could talk about. Um, Probably we should start with the whole conversation at the tea party because you already mentioned that as your
Yeah.
favorite. So elaborate.
Well, it's I should have wrote better notes or notes at all on why I like this so much. I thought I'd be ready with this.
I mean, if it's just an awesome vibe, then it's
It
just an
might
awesome
just I
vibe.
think it's that, but it's also the man noted that I think Sai notes or the Mauer notes that he doesn't really buy into the concept of rituals and yet still does this whole tea ritual. Like the serving of the tea is very much a ritual. Yeah, I really should have put notes because I did not. I've lost the plot on that. So I'm just going to go with, as you said, vibe. It
Okay.
was a really good vibe. Or
Hmm. Yeah.
um yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say there was a lot of back and forth, a lot of posturing, which was
Mhm.
interesting. And the fact that, like, there was not the information, like, Sai was doing this in order to try and get information, and there
I
was no information. It was just
I
posturing. So,
think Mary got the most important bit of motivation for Mauer out in this conversation, though. Both him having been in the war, and you noted this down under Mauer when we're talking about other characters. But the line, "My greatest concern, Mary Coburn," he said, "is that there won't be an opportunity for you to fight at all." And I think that is
right.
his. That is who he is as a person. The war broke him, and
Yeah.
this is like the foundation upon which Mauer as a character is built.
Hmm. That's a really good point because, like, Sai is looking for information about his plans and his schemes.
Hmm.
He doesn't get that, but what we do get is a lot of information about Mauer as a person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
That's a good distinction. I think we do get a lot of who Mauer is, not a lot about what Mauer is doing.
yeah, and that's great because we all like to know who Mauer is, and that's important. And he's a fascinating
Mhm.
character.
Absolutely. And I feel like Sai thinks that he wants to know who Mauer is, but like he's frustrated that he's not getting what Mauer is doing.
Yeah,
Again, we'll talk about it when we get to Sylvester, but I have things to say about that.
yeah. One of the big important things that happens in that conversation is Mary uh, trying to poison him,
Yeah.
and like so, she puts the poison in. She puts the spoon back exactly where it
Oh.
was, and he notices something wrong, and
Yeah.
Mary doesn't understand how he could have noticed until
Yeah.
Jamie remembers that the spoon was differently oriented before she did it, that it was upside down first and she had put it back in upside right, or vice versa.
Yeah.
And I sort of feel like a spoon being upside down or upside right would be noticeable for someone who is so highly trained that they can mix poison into tea and have it be.
I agree. Like that seems like part of any kind of assassin training would have been notice things so that they're back
Yeah.
exactly the
Like,
same.
if she's observing it closely enough to know exactly which angle to put it at,
Hmm.
then surely she would have noticed that it was oriented the other way.
So here is that you are buying into my Mary is sus theory.
No, I think that in this case, Mary is not as competent as she thinks she.
Oh no, I think she's trying to get Mauer to twig onto them.
Hmm.
I don't
I
actually
I see what you did
necessarily
there. um.
planted the seed of an idea there.
Yeah, interesting. Maybe she did do it on purpose. But in that case, she would have had to know that he was the sort of person who
I mean,
would.
there are hints that there are. I mean, there's the pebbles at the door. There's more than one instance or indication of his paranoia.
That is true, and we will talk about that later.
Yeah.
Um, but do you think that Mary noticed those and figured that he would notice the spoon being upside down, or do you think she was working with him beforehand in this conspiracy theory of
In
yours?
this that's a good question. And well, I there's a part of me. No, I am going to say she was not necessarily working with him ahead of time.
Okay.
But I do want to note, and I put this down in the Mary section of our things, but this is the second time in just as many plots that Mary's father has come up. Um, Maurer says he talks with her father often. And in the previous arc, Mary was chosen because her father is, or should have been someone, but had not succeeded. So I can definitely see, I mean, and obviously both of those elements could just be, artifacts of the same thing. Like obviously, she was he was Mary was chosen because her father was someone who could have been something, and that is also why Maurer was talking to him. But it could also be indicating that Mary's father is implicated in some way in some of these plots.
It does sound like Mary's birth father is a person of interest.
True, birth father, not Percy.
Yes. Well, technically not birth father because she's a clone and not.
Her
Is there a word
genetic
for that?
father.
I'm sure somebody somewhere has established a term for that in the sci-fi lexicon.
Probably.
But yeah, I'm sure he seems like he's probably an interesting person, and
hmm
uh, his identity and will probably have to
I'm
show up at some
sure it'll
point.
come up. Yeah.
Hmm
Yeah. All right.
So, anything else about the Tea Party?
Nope, not really. Just cool vibe. And
Yeah,
I had thoughts about like the point of ritual versus, you know, uppercase ritual versus lowercase rituals, and like comfort derived from that. But I didn't have time to properly articulate it. So, someone smart in the comments, feel free to do so.
uh-huh. Well, I have some thoughts about rituals under like the character section for
Oh,
Mauer, so
cool. Okay, yeah. In which
we
case,
can
I'll have to think
we
about
can
that
throw ideas at
faster.
each other there.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So after that, when Mauer heads off, Sai gets his people into position, and it turns out that his plan, or the plan that he makes up as he goes, which I feel it's a mix of both,
Yeah.
is, well, the way he describes it is he says, the whole idea was to start a local riot, a localized riot. If Cecil did his job and avoided getting eaten by whiskers while running around in the rain, the Academy can arrive, shut down the riot in the early stages, and lay the blame at the shepherd's feet.
I feel like
It.
that's giving the Academy more credit than it's due.
Really?
Well, I feel like the Academy will show up,
Yeah,
shut the riot down in the early stages,
yeah.
and then not care about leaving blame for what's happening. I feel like that happening would be just what the shepherd would need to be like, look, they don't care about us.
No, see, I think the Academy would lay the blame at his feet in that they would come, they would shut down the riot, they would say, you're the one who's being seditious and starting riots, and we're going to take
Feed
you and,
you to Gorger.
yeah, or, Hangman, or make you into a
Sure,
Stitch, or whatever the
sure.
appropriate thing is. I
But
think they would take down the Shepherd if they
yes,
believed that he was actively starting a riot.
but that makes him a martyr, a symbol. And I would not be surprised, just for someone who is so obviously well tapped into both the way, like the general vibe of the population and the concept of symbols. I'm sure he's accounted for that and
Hmm
is ready. That's definitely one of the paths of his plan for things to happen.
Yes. But I think that his plan is in early enough stages that the martyr effect wouldn't be as strong as he wants it to be.
Probably.
So I think people would be upset and it would become like a thing that they remember as a reason why they don't like the academy, but it wouldn't be enough for them to like rally around the symbol of the martyr Reverend Mauer.
I mean,
And
forgive me for using these words, but like it's pretty clear that
how dare you?
I know. It is pretty obscure that no, it's pretty clear that Mauer has disciples. He has people there who believe in him enough that if he were to die, his message and his story would be carried on.
Well, yeah, he's
And
got like Gil and
yeah,
what's his face, and
all these different people who are
yeah.
there. You know, sure. I feel like these people are tapped enough, or Mauer has done enough legwork with those people that a dead Mauer, even at this stage in the plan, even if it's a Mauer dead of random reasons, is probably a Mauer that is a martyr for the people.
Hmm. Yeah, I think those people would definitely
They-
rally around the martyrdom of Mauer.
and spread
I
it.
don't know if they would be able to spread it as well as Mauer has been able to, and probably it
Perhaps
would be a
not.
much lower threat to the Academy in that case. But I think that what Sai is really intending is that the Academy will lay the blame at the Shepherd's feet in such a way that the people will also blame the Shepherd.
Yes, but I don't know that the Academy has the like that is clearly what Sai is intending.
Yeah.
But I don't get that the Academy like the Academy has not inspired me with confidence in its ability to care enough to manipulate
Mm.
a crowd. I'm just thinking of what's his face at the dinner last week, just like, oh, a war, I don't care, just murder them all.
Okay, so what you're really saying is that the Academy will care enough to blame the Shepherd and take him out, but they won't care enough to try and convince all
The
the
people.
people that
Yes.
it was the Shepherd's fault and that they should
Hate him.
hate him.
Yes.
Okay, I can see that. I think I'm with you on that.
Like Sai is putting
But
too much.
maybe Sai would himself like try to lay the blame at the Shepherd's feet if the Academy fails to do so.
Potentially.
Potentially.
So then it's a question of whether Sai can move fast enough and act fast enough compared to the Shepherd's dead man switch martyr narrative.
Yes.
Okay.
So really, it's just getting more complicated if his plan works, which is just the way he likes it.
Yes. All right. Do you want to talk about this next line that you have?
I think I was gonna. I think I was gonna talk about that later, but I don't remember whether I actually put it later.
Okay.
This is the sort of ruminating that I would usually cut. FYI,
Oh, I intend to cut absolutely nothing. Not even the thumping of
of Basil
chairs.
hopping up and hopping down.
Exactly.
Well, you're editing; it's your prerogative. Well, we'll see. If not, people will get a unprecedented behind the scenes view at how we do things around here. um, yeah. Okay. So yeah, I don't know if this belongs here under the plot or later under the characters, but I thought it was interesting that Mauer left Sai speechless in the office when they were having that conversation,
Hmm.
and Mauer said something about Mary having Sai to look after him, and Sai
Yeah.
was speechless. He was like, I don't often get left speechless, and yet Mauer had done it. But then in the second chapter in 2.8, when they're faking this attack, Gordon is shouting and Helen starts shouting and Sai is trying to get things off the ground and Mauer eventually just kind of like is left with nothing more to say and Sai is like, ha, you've
Got
got
you.
nothing to say now. And I was like, aha, this is a parallel.
Petty revenge is what it is.
Ah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's all really I have to say about the plot at this point. I think that we should talk about this end line, though. The Academy is coming. They're coming for us. It was always their plan, and I've been planning how to stop them for some
Hmm.
time. I think that is his true colors. That is his actual plan. Um,
Yes, I do think so, and I didn't mean when I said maybe, or I think I commented on the notes, whatever. Or so it seems. I don't know, whatever. But yeah, I don't disagree that that is his true colors, but I don't necessarily see it as a bad thing yet, as in we haven't really seen Mauer be as shitty as the Academy or Percy or the people that Percy is now tied up with, even
Well,
though we're likely going to see that soon enough. I get the vibe this is a
yeah,
world where most people are shit.
yes. Well, we have seen him release a killing monster onto an unsuspecting populace, resulting in the deaths of
The
several people.
Yes, but the impression I got of that was that it was meant to be largely contained to the Academy itself, with most of the rumors being outside.
Okay, I think
You
that's
know,
giving him the benefit of the doubt, but
potentially.
uh, yeah. So I do think that that is his real plan. So we see Sai's plan, and it's convoluted and might work but might backfire, and then we see Mauer's plan,
Which is
which is,
convoluted and complicated and might backfire.
well, we don't actually know what the plan is. He says he has a plan, but he doesn't say it yet. So I assume that'll be in the next chapter,
Hmm.
maybe. But just the fact that he has been anticipating a crackdown from the Academy.
Yeah.
He says it was always their plan to come for us. I wonder who he
Well,
means by us. Like the
the city, the
people, the
people.
rebels, like,
Well, clearly the people. He's talking to. He's trying to galvanize the crowd here. He's like,
right.
I am one of you, and they
But
are going to come for you, the salt of the earth here.
yeah, but why would he think that the Academy wants to come for just the general
I don't
population?
think he thinks that. I think he wants to provoke them into that
Hmm.
to galvanize the rebellion.
Yeah.
Um
I think that he sees himself as a rebel against the Academy, and he
yes.
sees the people following him as recruits,
Hmm.
even if they don't see themselves as that. And so the shepherd is saying, well,
Is creating the situation for them to be
yes. And
pushed
so he's
into
like,
this.
it was always their plan to crack down on any attempted rebellion, and I'm attempting rebellion.
Well, I don't think
And
I think he's presenting it to the people as like, hey, you have a few freedoms, not many, but it's always been the Academy's plan to get rid of even the little bit of like life and safety that you think you have.
yeah.
So might as well fight with me, and we can take this down together or die trying.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, like I think you're right. Like obviously he's playing it up for the crowd. He's trying to get them
Yep.
galvanized. It just feels to me like a weird way of saying things
Uh,
because I feel like it's a weird thing for him to say. That's all. It's like
okay.
if
It didn't
like
stand out to me as much as
okay,
it clearly did for you, so I don't know.
I
Not
don't
trying
know.
to dismiss what you're saying. It's just I'm not
Sure.
grokking it necessarily.
Sure. Yeah. I don't know. I guess I mean we'll see what happens next because that was a cliffhanger like they most of the chapters so
So
far.
far, yeah.
So yeah, we'll
Yeah.
just have to wait and see what the plan is and what his actually means by
Yeah.
expecting the Academy to crack down on everyone.
Mm.
Anyway, I think that wraps up our plot section,
Overall plot section. Yep.
and we're only half an hour in, so that might be a new record.
Zoom, zoom, zoom.
So in terms of world building, um, there was a lot of world building going on, and there was one little detail that I noticed
Yeah, I picked up on that one too.
about like just kind of the general tree building aesthetic
Hmm.
was when those guys went to get tools to use as weapons from the gardening shed, and they came back with, quote, poles with saws on the edges, sometimes used for trimming building. But I just thought that was just such a subtle
Yeah.
phrasing, but trimming buildings is
It's,
exactly what you would have here.
yeah. It took me a minute. I read it, I was like, wait, what? Oh yeah. Right. They're all tree buildings. Like of course your building is if you're not paying attention, your building is going to grow. I wonder if your cat's going crazy back there. Um
Hi, buddy. He's got a toy. Should I stop him so that
no, no,
he
no.
doesn't wreck the audio?
It's fine.
All right.
I yeah, I wonder if there are instead of like rundown, decrepit buildings in Radham, instead there are buildings that have been left abandoned and are just overgrown masses of hedge and vine and
Oh,
stuff.
that's true. Yeah, that probably is a thing.
Like a cool, very cool looking aesthetic. I feel rather than like what we picture as like a haunted house in Radham. The kids go to like an overgrown building and like trying to. It seems creepy in its own way, like all the thorns and vines and branches everywhere as the
Hmm.
kids in it go to the abandoned building and walk into that house, or the just that aesthetic. I'm sure is very different. That like pop culture aesthetic of a haunted house, I'm sure, is very different in Radham than it is in ours.
For sure. And I sort of had this impression, which is a stupid impression for me to have had, that all of these trees were like immaculately maintained.
Hmm.
But this is like a very dirty, half-assed sort of setting.
I agree with you. I was with you that, like, absolutely, these are like buildings that happen to have nice vine like build trees,
Hmm.
nicely flush to the stonework, nothing
Well, in the
sticking
case
out.
of the church, it said that it had been cut flush.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
sort of like I assumed it's a default, but obviously it can't be.
Hmm. But also, like, it was foolish of us to think that, given what we know of this
The
society.
world, yeah,
Like, clearly, most of these trees are just going to be left to go feral, or whatever
yeah.
the term is for plants. Um,
There is a
and
term. There is a word. I can't remember it.
yeah, and so everything would, by default, except like the academy and a couple of more important buildings, would probably just be wildly overgrown, covered in weeds. Probably these like academy plant things are growing as weeds in everywhere, and
Hmm.
like nobody's maintaining them because nobody cares except for like the important places like the academy itself.
Yeah, and this church, which is interesting because one is repeatedly told that the churches should not be important.
Yeah. Well, I think that it might be like, having tools to maintain your building. It might be like maintaining your lawn.
With a
And
bit
so
more effort
everybody,
and work, yeah.
yeah, everybody just kind of, or like, people trim their hedge every year or whatever, and they'll trim their building every year. So they'll have the tools to do it, and maybe they'll do it. But like, the,
Yeah.
that's just, individual buildings. So like probably people's individual properties, if all of their properties are grown like
Yeah.
the public buildings are. Like they're
Makes
probably in various degrees of maintenance, just like houses and lawns and
yeah, that
gardens
makes
are.
sense. Makes sense.
Hmm.
Um all
In
right.
terms of actual locations, I mean, the church, obviously, we get into the church.
We see the
Uh,
rectory.
yeah. Maurer's office, and all of his particularities, which I think reflects more on Maurer as a person than on the church as a
As a
building.
place or
Yeah.
yeah, even an institution necessarily.
Hmm. It was interesting that it was recently expanded. Maurer says that running a church in Radham is kind of a lost cause.
Well, he specifically says the men I answer to tend to think a church in Radham is a lost cause, which, if we buy into the idea that he is tied into whatever rebellious movement that exists, the men I answer to could be, sure, the church authorities don't think it's worth investing in Radham
Yeah.
because Radham is too deeply tied to the academy. But it might
Hmm.
also be that the people involved with the people in charge of the rebellion um are think that like a church would stand out too much, especially a church that's doing too well would bring undue attention, so it's not worth investing there because
Okay. I mean, possibly that's true as well, but in that case, he probably means both
I'm sure he
because
does, yeah.
Jamie also pointed out that it was kind of a commonly held opinion that a church in a place like Radham would
Yeah.
be foolish and
Yeah.
that it needed a special kind of person to run it.
Yeah,
Um,
I think for the reader that's we're kind of
hmm.
potentially
Hmm.
led
Yeah,
to
that's
have
an
these thoughts.
interesting insight. I like it. But the thing about it having been recently expanded that they note about is that
Mhm.
clearly Mauer.
Is
I
a
assume
character.
that this has happened since Mauer was assigned there
I think
because
that's
Mauer,
that led to yeah, we
yeah,
yeah,
Mauer is the sort of person who can expand a church congregation in
even in this
a
kind of
place like
environment.
Radham to the point that the whole church needs to be expanded. So I thought that was a
It
interesting little.
it tells us a lot about the hold Mauer has on the
Yes,
town.
exactly.
Um, and speaking of the town in Radham, and Sai noted that people don't tend to leave doors open in Radham, which makes sense. both because it's a city, and people in cities tend to not population density leave indicate says that you don't really want to leave doors open.
Yeah,
Um,
I've never lived in a place where people leave their doors open. That's just weird.
I grew up in a small town, like didn't bother locking the door.
Sure. I grew up
Um,
in a city, also a
yeah,
city that has cold winters, and you don't want to let the heat out.
yeah.
uh,
But
sure.
I think it makes especially more sense when you have venomous feral cat snakes potentially wandering at night.
Yep.
Um, and also we keep calling it the Academy or Radham Academy, but like, is that its name, or does it have a more fancy, like, actually name? Like, we just talk about like the city when you're near a city, and it's just whatever
Mhm.
the city's closest. So is Radham Academy or the Academy really just it, or does it have is it like
I
Harvard
do
or
think that Radham Academy is the name. Like that,
potentially?
that
And
was the impression I got. Because if it wasn't that, they probably would have said something like the Academy in Radham or something like that.
right, but I feel like Radham Academy. I'm not necessarily arguing with you here. I'm just the counterpoint that it's the Academy in Radham. It's Radham Academy. It's just like the common nomenclature, just calling it the thing in the place rather than
Yeah.
whatever fanciful name it
Yeah.
may have. I'm not
Yeah.
saying that it's not Radham
Hmm.
Academy. It probably is. I'm just
Yeah.
curious if you
Yeah.
noticed anything else there. But
I think like I see what you're coming at because there are places like that where it's like they have like an official long fancy name, but then they
hmm
have just sort of like the common name, and it's usually something like Radham Academy.
hmm
But if it was something long, I would expect it to be like something like actually too hard for people to want to say.
hmm
Um,
yeah.
because like it would probably be like the Royal Academy of Biosciences in Radham by order of Her Majesty Queen Victoria the Third,
Yeah, something like that.
something like that,
Yeah.
and then people would call it Radham Academy,
hmm
um, or even something like the Academy of Radham or something like the University of Ottawa is often called Ottawa U.
Yeah.
Radham Academy, probably something like that.
Yeah.
That's you brought it up. That's my speculation on it.
Yeah. I don't anywhere. All right. Do you wanna use our new Monster Corner sting?
uh, you suggested that we start one, but I only have the old one, which is the good old fashioned Monster Corner.
Perfect. We should get a sound bit for that. I think it's Monster Corner is deserving of one.
Yes, I think we should get sound bits for all of it, but I haven't
Sure.
thought of anything good for each. Um,
Audience, please.
New discussion question.
Yep. Suggest sound bits.
Maybe we should have like a contest.
Okay. For Halloween, let's do a Halloween contest of Monster Corner sound bits.
Yes, or sound bits for any other section.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
Sounds
and the best one will win the pleasure of hearing their sound bit every other week.
This is our
For
officially launched contest. We did not discuss this, but it is now launched, and have at it, world.
woo,
All right, Monster Corner. Monster Corner.
yes, and this was very interesting because there were several interesting monsters
Yes.
brought up.
Yeah. Let's talk about the non-specific ones first.
Yeah,
Um,
so they were talking about the war that Mauer had fought in, or the one that Mauer's father had.
no. That was
It
Mauer's
was
war.
Mauer himself's
Yeah,
war.
Mauer's father's war was like a good, honest war where men were fighting stitched, and if you got shot, you died. Whereas Mauer's war was a war full of parasites and monstrosities,
Yes.
and honestly, before we get there, the visual that I really had when they were talking about the war, especially with the unfeeling lines of stitched or whatever, is the Future War segments from like the Terminator movies. Just like,
Okay.
yeah, the humans overwhelmed by like these lines of
Mhm.
unfeeling, yeah,
Yep.
monstrous robots,
Yep.
skeletal shapes, whatever. But yeah,
Yep.
that's the visual
Absolutely.
I got. But yeah.
So the quote that Jamie says is the war he fought in had parasites. The worst ones paralyzed a man, left him screaming, so crowned soldiers could collect them and turn them into stitched. Or just left them to scream themselves raw and die from exposure. I can't blame him for being careful with his teeth. And then Helen says, those weren't the worst ones. I've seen some of the ones people don't talk about without clearance.
Stuff clearly worked on in the bowels.
Yes.
Yeah, and I definitely. I mean, we could sit here and speculate all day about those worst ones.
Hmm.
Like immediately you can think of like 3 or 4
Yeah,
worst things
it's
that could
not
be
hard to
happening.
come up with a
Yeah,
situation that's worse than being paralyzed and pain.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, it's. I thought it was an interesting parallel to like World War One era gas warfare.
Yeah,
Which I mean,
absolutely.
I'm certain that's the deliberate parallel here. Uh, World War One at least is renowned for those horrible the mustard gas leaving people raw and burned and screaming,
Hmm.
their lungs,
And honestly,
coughing their lungs.
the timeline fits for
It's
it being
exactly
World
that.
War One
Exactly.
exactly. Hmm.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. The other monsters that are brought up are two specific ones, specifically threats that bred,
Yeah.
aka S class threats.
Hmm.
Um, the Fishing Man, so named because of a mispronunciation of fission, had been bad, though the problem had ultimately corrected itself. The Wise Rats had been worse, another all hands on deck situation, though it had been far tidier, confined to one laboratory building. It had taken 3 weeks to clean up the mess.
What I find interesting about both of those, though they do say the Wise Rats was an all hands on deck, so maybe that's like less of a thing. But you don't picture these kinds of breeding problems um, as something that like fits the lamb's sorry, that fits the lamb's strengths.
Mhm.
Which is like social engineering and infiltration and manipulation. Whereas if it's like this, like these biological things that are just running amok, trouble with tribbles style,
Yep.
um, like you picture someone like Gorger being more effective at handling it. So yeah, I'm really curious as to what these two things are.
Honestly, it could be anything because any monster that self replicates is
Terrifying.
terrifying. I mean, like we even talked last week about Whiskers
Yeah.
and what it would be like if Whiskers had been
Yes.
engineered to self replicate as originally
Hmm.
intended, and that was
Yeah.
utterly horrific. So,
Uh huh.
yeah,
Just like denial of entire areas of the world,
like
presumably.
even we could just take it like the way it says, like the wise rats, like
Oh, I'm
rats.
picturing a Rats of Nim situation for them.
Yeah,
But
maybe not so wise as that, but like even having like intelligent rats that seek and also seek and destroy and also spread, like
overuse.
even just that based on what they're called is enough to
Hmm.
be academy level
And the
terrifying
thing is,
monster.
rats are already incredibly smart.
Yes.
Like, um, I remember a story my grandmother told me. She grew up poor Quebec, Montreal in like the 30s.
Okay.
Um, but she at some point she mentioned, going down into their cellar to get eggs or something and seeing a rat down there on its back holding a potato that was larger than itself and another rat pulling it by the tail. So essentially the first rat was acting as a sled that the other rat was pulling. And like
That's
that's
hilarious.
just wild to me that that's like
Yep.
tool use essentially.
Mhm. Yep. Speaking of rats and smart and the rats of Nim, I just want to say
Mhm.
that Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of Nim was one of my favorite books that I read as a kid.
It's a great book.
It's a great book. If you haven't read it,
Do.
it's worth it.
Um
Read it to your kids.
It's actually should go onto the list.
Yes, put it on your list.
I will. The canon.
Tommy's keeping a list of books that he is required to read to young one.
Yep. That and Watership Down I should add.
Uh, I haven't read Watership Down, but I've heard that it's like
I mean, the author of Watership Down, it's another one of those like, oh, these are just stories I told my kids at bedtime and I put them together to write into a book.
mm, I I
Like
haven't read it, but my impression of it was that it wasn't really a children's book.
it's not
But I could be
not
wrong.
a children's book.
Maybe we're just being too soft on children these days.
Clearly.
Clearly.
Yep.
Anyway,
All right. It's
in terms of historical references,
you were right.
historical references. um, Yeah, so we have this mention of the American War, and we actually, as we mentioned just a few minutes ago, there's two wars mentioned here. The
Mm-hmm.
more recent one, which seems to be like a fantasy take
World.
on World War One, and then there's this American War, the one fought between people and Stitch that Mauer's father was in. And when I first read it, I was not paying very close attention to timelines, and I assumed that this was the Revolutionary War,
Which is even
which,
before the Stitch were invented.
which is, yeah, we're off by like an entire century.
Yeah.
Which this time reading it, I'm paying attention to timelines and stuff, and I got that right away. But the first time I was like, oh, the Americans fighting the British over who's in charge of this American territory. Clearly, this is the revolution.
Yeah.
But no, it isn't. So, which tells me that in the Revolutionary War, which happened before all this Woolston nonsense, the Americas probably would have become independent, because I'm assuming everything before 1819
21 or
is
whatever. Yeah.
identical to real life history, which may not be the case, but I'm assuming it is. So we would assume that the Americas became independent and then were reconquered
I think
by
that's
the British
absolutely.
Empire
Yep.
much later. I don't think, now I'm not really well versed in American history, but I don't think that there was any real life war around the time of Mauer being a little kid
Not where the
between that would
no
be a parallel of this. I think this is just completely, totally fictitious, which is fine.
only war that could theoretically parallel it and does not at all is the Spanish-American War, which was in the 1890s, late 1890s.
Okay.
But that's between Spain and the U.S. and resulted in Cuba's independence and all that. This is Teddy Roosevelt's Rough Riders and riding, charging up hills and whatnot. But yeah,
Okay.
clearly nothing to do with this war.
So what this means is that actually we've been thinking it's the British crown this whole time, but it's actually the Spanish crown.
Ah, yes, you are correct. It is not Queen Victoria the Eternal, but rather Queen Isabella the Eternal.
Yes.
Yep.
I mean, the fact that everybody has British names suggests otherwise, but I think that's a very fun
I
thought.
agree. I like that. Yeah, but then you get to have those fun, like, Castilian noble names, but with British, it's John Smith D. I'm probably going to cut that because I didn't have the actual line joke ready, so.
Keep going, keep going. Okay.
Yeah.
Um,
All right. And the other thing I wanted to point out, and it's very emblematic, and we talked a little bit about how this is clearly related to World War One or analogous to World War One, and just how these are, or this like the clear revelation of like the escalation of warfare.
mm,
The Mauer's father's war, the American War, was just lines of stitched fighting against living soldiers, presumably just that because it's considered a different kind of war than Mauer's war,
yep.
which was like World War One, a pile of all kinds of new technological horrors, just mowing down people, and
Hmm.
there's very much a distinction between World War One and wars before.
Yeah.
Though arguably the American Civil War is really one of the first like World War One style
Okay.
horrifying wars. But just on a global scale, World War One is really it.
Hmm. Yeah, and it also makes you wonder, like, if like we don't know how this story is going to proceed or end or anything like that, but if this technology and the status quo proceeds for
Hmm.
the next century to modern day,
Well, I
it just
feel
makes you wonder what sort of
I I mean I'm picturing a much more subtle type of viruses re-engineering genetic codes to do
yeah.
to like do specific things or very much more quick and subtle versions of what Percy was attempting, slowly replace a city over generations with
Hmm.
clones. I'm seeing some, you can do that with a virus real fast.
Yeah,
Yeah. It's a scary thought.
it is a scary thought.
All right. Do you want to move on to our character bit?
Yeah, let's do that before we get lost in
Characters.
characters. Before we get lost in like uh,
Yeah.
depression over the thought of the future of warfare in this setting.
Well, for lack of a better place to actually talk about it, and I think I put a place. I actually put it down there with Maurer, and we kind of talked about it. But I want to talk about it now before we
Okay.
get on to characters. And I'm going back to that line. My greatest concern, Mary Coburn, he said, is that there won't be an opportunity for you to fight at all. So I'm, picturing him really fighting for the greater good. But I feel like what he is afraid of most is a world where, and clearly informed by his experiences in the war, a world where it's just engineered creatures and stitched men and slave, soldiers and whatnot, just lorded over by a tiny cadre of like immortal elites left.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. There won't be any war anymore
Yeah,
because the whole world will have been conquered and ruled with an iron fist.
yeah, like there's going to be no one
Yeah.
left to fight. You
It's like
know,
the modern version of the Pax Romana sort of thing.
Yeah, but like I see it like much more insidious than that. I don't. I think he's afraid of there being no one left really, naturally human except for the ones at the top.
Okay, yeah.
Um, have you read? No, you have not read Shade's Children, right? I
No,
think you
I
looked at it
I
when
just
you came
you,
here
you
last.
recommended it to me recently, and it's on my to read list.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, just sort of
yes.
that that's what that made me think of. That
Mhm.
image, that visual. But anyway, characters.
Yes, Sylvester. Yeah, I kind of for a bunch of these, like, there's so much character work going on in these chapters.
Yeah.
I just kind of threw I thoughts in here. They're not in any
Yeah.
particular order, so if
I
we
added
jump
random
around a lot,
bits
then
there too.
uh, well, I mean, you know what our podcast is like, so
Very rigid,
that shouldn't be
structured,
surprising for
and
anyone.
ordered.
Uh, yes, go
Um
ahead.
okay, the first thing I want to talk about, and I think we kind of talked about this with Malia last week, is that Sai, and especially, oh, hi Basil. Um
He's on my shoulder.
yeah. Sai. Well, okay. I'm going to do a tiny bit of Worm spoilers here. So if you've not read Worm,
Stop now, read Worm, and come back
come
to this
back.
podcast.
Correct. Um, and I'm wondering if Sai was written to be mm, either more self-aware in his own self-deceptions or more obvious about it than Taylor was, as a sort of reaction to like the fact that a lot of the audience read Worm and took Taylor at face value. I
Maybe.
feel like Psy is easily as self-deceptive as Taylor was, but I feel like he is both more aware of it. He like catches himself lying, and then there's also a lot of moments where he's so obviously not catching himself
Mhm.
being deceptive in a way that I don't think we ever like. It was easy to get lost in Taylor's delusions, for lack of a better word, whereas for
Mhm.
Psy, it's like, wait a second, Psy, you're like clearly this is you building a narrative in your head to convince yourself of
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
My
I
example of it. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I feel like it's more organic. That's probably a bad word as well. With Sylvester, because like Taylor was compartmentalizing a lot
True.
and like sort of knowing what a thing was and then deciding to just ignore it or forget about
Mhm.
it because it was bothersome. Whereas Sai kind of like genuinely wants to think of himself as like this great understander of how things are, and so
Yeah.
he just kind of like builds these narratives in his head, and it's just like
Mhm.
it's less of a like I will think this and not this, or but I was thinking that, but and it's just more like he gets caught up in his own ideas.
Yeah, and I kind of feel like the
That was probably a gross mischaracterization of Taylor, by the way, but you get what I'm saying.
no, I don't think it is a gross mischaracterization, but I feel like for Psy, like the thing that really made me think of this is that statistic he just pulls out of thin air. Now we had a 3 out of 10 chance of whatever, whatever. It's like you just made that number up to make yourself
Mhm.
feel good about things. Like there is nothing to really inform that statistic except now you have a number and you're like, aha, now this is what is happening.
Yes.
I don't remember what the 3 out of 10 was just like that, but I just pulled out the 3 out of 10, and yeah,
What
um,
was the third thing? Oh, that was just to see if you were paying attention.
yeah, exactly. Like, oh, all right.
Um, yeah, we already mentioned the whole being left speechless, left
Yep.
at a loss for words, which was a really fun parallel, as I said before, and says a lot about both Sylvester and Mauer and their interplay. Their
Yeah.
because like Sylvester keeps putting parallels between himself and Mauer, um,
Hmm.
and I think that he's right in doing so, even
But
more perhaps
yeah,
than him and Mary.
definitely. Even though he continues to do that here,
Mhm.
and you talk about that a little bit in your notes here
Yeah,
about
there was a contrast with Mary that was brought up. I'm going to read another quote because Wildbow words it better than I do. I was learning little tidbits about Mary, and one was that she didn't like to fail. This was where we differed. She valued the execution, while I liked getting a reaction out of people, even if it was in an indirect way, through some lesson I'd given Jamie. When her execution wasn't enough, she got cranky, same as I did when I failed to budge people. Rick being first and foremost among them. Rick,
yeah.
of course, the arch nemesis of
Hmm.
Sylvester. Um, I feel like these two things aren't that different.
I agree with you. I think this is part of Sai's self delusion here.
Oh no, I don't think it's a delusion. I think the only delusion is that he thinks that this is a place where they differ.
Exactly. That's my point. That he's that's the delusion. That like
Oh, sure.
yeah.
Yeah. Cuz like okay, in a way there is a difference cuz like, he did that whole thing with what's his face at Mont where he got beat up in order to
Uh
establish
huh.
the pecking order.
Yeah. I have completely forgotten that guy's name.
The name that popped into my head is Eric,
Oh, that
and
was also the name that popped into my head.
really? Was that
So
his name? That wasn't
I
his name.
it can't have been his name, but that's the name that I thought of. Sorry, Eric out there. But that is absolutely the name that I thought. We'll go dig for it later.
Sure.
Um,
Anyway, that being said, like Sai did that, and he failed on purpose in order to get a
yeah,
reaction out of people, whereas Mary would not want to fail on purpose because failing is
sure.
out of character for her. So I think that he is correct that they do differ in that. Um, but I think that both of them, I think that those are just like the outside view of what is essentially the same thing, which is that they both like doing the thing they're good at and doing it well. For her, that is like making a kill or
Yeah,
um, stabbing someone with her whatever or poison or whatever.
yeah.
And for him, it's
Poisoning an entire
manipulating
people.
them and getting the reaction out of them that they want. So they're both the same thing. They specialize in different ways, and so they're they value different types. They value the success of their different methods of
Approaches.
operation.
Yeah. Yeah, and like looking at the differences in the approach is not the right way, and the fact that Sai is doing that is yeah, him looking for reasons to not to be different, I guess.
Mhm.
I wonder if part of that is Sai having a slight fear of being redundant in the lambs.
Maybe.
I don't know. I'm
I
just
mean, she did
saying.
fit in very well.
Exactly.
So she has no need to fear, but she does have these fears, especially around Helen.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that it's not so much that she's fearing to be left out, although that is something that's probably at the back of her head, her fear of being left alone. But I think it's just her trying to
Hmm.
contribute the way all of them are trying to contribute. They have an idea, they throw it, and
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, you think she's sus as heck, so maybe there's something more to it than that. But I think it's just her being part of the gang
Maybe.
rather than
Yeah.
like over achieving, trying to whatever. Anyway,
Sure.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, we're talking a lot about Sai contrast and comparison with other characters, and the next one is Gordon
Absolutely.
because has this whole thing where he's like, Gordon, he's so great, he's so awesome, everyone loves him. I don't care about that, but this that he got to be at the center of this chaos, the stone that set the ripples in motion. This was what made me jealous of him for the first time.
Yeah. And we see that play out again later on where they're talking about creating a second victim, and Sai's
Mhm.
like me, and Helen's like
Me,
no
please,
me.
please,
And it's
please.
like please, like I don't care if it doesn't make any sense. Me, I'm a better actor, and Helen's like
Yeah,
no, I'm a better actor than you. Come
yeah.
on.
Yeah, you definitely get the impression that Sai would happily sacrifice the entire plan if
To
it meant
be
he got to be
Yeah. Oh,
the center of it.
absolutely. Absolutely. One of the other things I noticed, I put that down in the Gordon section, but I want to talk about it now.
Okay.
Um, is that Sai says that Gordon is the one who is most able to handle being separated from the rest of the group. Um, but they still needed Sai at Mothmont, and that kind of makes me think it'd be interesting to see that situation played out differently with the different lambs. Sai and all the lambs minus Jamie, or Sai and all the lambs minus Gordon, and
Hmm.
see what whether that lack is felt as much as the one of Sai not being there was.
Hmm. And adding on to that, I wonder, like, the lambs without Mary after she's worked herself into the group compared to the lambs without Mary before she joined in the first
True, that's
place
an
could
interesting.
be interesting.
Absolutely. Um, and the other bit of comparison that I thought was the jealousy here was Sai upset that Gordon punched Mauer, removing his weapon, as it were. And Sai's like, oh, I wish I had been able to do that. And I'm sure Sai doesn't mean I wish I had been able to punch Mauer in the mouth, but
Although he totally does mean that as well.
yes, but I kind of feel like it would have been interesting to see what Sai's methodology to remove Mauer's weapon would have been, and
Mm.
whether Mauer or whether Sai would have been as successful at it as Gordon was,
Mhm. I think
because
he could have been, but it would take him a lot more time.
an effort. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
Sai is certain that it would have been just effort, no effort, and would have done it too if he had been in the right place. But
Mhm.
yeah, I agree with you that I don't think it would have been as easy for Sai to take care of.
We do have some interesting stuff about uh, Sai's origin story, I guess.
Yeah.
The quote is Jamie had told me that I built my personality and means of dealing with people by copying and studying the adults around me. It had been a necessary thing, a scrabbling for control, when I'd been subjected to appointment after appointment, the space between filled with every imaginable form of testing for sanity, for memory, for competence of all stripes. I'd learned to read people because I'd had to.
Yeah, that's a really horrifying thought.
Well, yes, it is. Like all this stuff being him being subjected to all this is pretty horrific.
Yeah,
But I mean, it's the Academy. What do you expect?
sure.
Um, the interesting thing I think is the way that like his main specialty, the thing he's good at, the thing that he contributes to the group the most
Hmm.
in, he thinks of it as being like a side effect. Like they were
Yeah,
going for something else. I mean, he said they were going for like him being able to be a wild card and sort of fit in anywhere.
yeah,
But like the idea that his main strength is something that he picked up on the
cobbled
side
together.
because he had to, I think that's really interesting.
Oh, for sure.
And since we're talking about comparing with other characters, I think this is an interesting parallel to Helen because he also said many chapters ago that Helen isn't actually meant to be an actor.
Hmm.
She just picked up being an actor um, in order to survive being, a
What she
alien
is.
humanoid in
Yeah,
a human
an octopus
society.
in the body.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
And that turns
I
out being her main strength. So this is, I think, something that is.
it's an interesting parallel I had not picked up on
Mhm.
there. The connecting the two. Um, and
And
I think it also tells us some interesting things about Sai's origins, or maybe some hints as to what Project Wyvern are all about. Um, which seems to be creating a psyche from scratch,
mm,
and you have to kind of wonder if there's anything left of the person that was Sai before Wyvern.
yeah.
You
Yeah,
know,
that's an interesting point. Yeah.
like, is part of Sai's like mental architecture this original child that was had all these other bits of psyche or wiped or grafted on and all that, and what he had to put together, like
Hmm.
informed by the original person or not, or I really
Hmm.
don't know. I'm really that's the thing I think I am most curious about in this story, like what Wyvern is or meant to do, or like what it was.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, yes, I'm pretty equally interested in all of them, to be honest. But
Yeah,
definitely,
like I think we know what Helen was meant to be. We kind of know what Cy says Gordon and Jamie are.
mhm,
So yeah.
yeah. Um,
Okay.
I was gonna say something. I don't remember what I was gonna say. So I'm gonna say something else, which is, it does mention that like they're testing for sanity, for memory,
Yeah.
and we know that his memory is terrible.
Mhm.
Um, and I thought it was funny when this was brought up in
I
this
agree. Yeah.
chapter, where Jamie is like, "I'd like to remind you that Hale needs you to impress. I don't need reminders. My memory isn't that bad. I lied."
Yeah.
It's like, well, if we thought he was deceiving himself about his memory being bad, I think that's proof
That.
enough.
Yep. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Um, do you want to talk about this Lacey bit, or
Oh
just
yeah, I just
calling it
also
out as
like
funny?
just in terms of like little snippets that are funny.
Hmm.
Was when he told Lacey to go and get Cecil or whoever,
Yeah.
and she's like, glaring at him, and then finally she agrees to it and walks off, and he just calls after her, "Fetch."
Yeah. Just being a
He's
dick.
such a jerk to
Yep.
Lacey. Like he's such like I keep saying that like he's a decent kid deep down, but he's such a jerk to Lacey specifically, and it's just like,
Yeah.
geez, man, like
Yep.
he doesn't even treat Rick this badly.
That's a fair point. Yeah. Anything else you want to say about Sai before we move on to other characters?
Yeah, let's move on. Um, we have in our notes Mary, um,
I think we've
but
talked
we
about.
talked about all of these things.
Yep.
She's cranky when she fails at performance, and her dad keeps getting brought up.
So,
Helen has some
Helen.
interesting stuff.
Yeah. So I specifically wanted to note her line when Ibit gives me lessons. He sometimes warns me not to underestimate people. Humans did some amazing things over the years. Geniuses pop up now and again. People with exceptional natural ability or those with talent. And I am 100% sure Ibit is specifically talking about himself in that sentence.
Yes, probably, but I mean, that aside,
It's a
it's
valid
a
point.
valid point.
It is, but probably not in the way that Ibit was expecting it or saying it necessarily.
Yes, no, I think you're absolutely correct.
Yeah. Um, there's also the fact that she used the phrase silly Billy. And I think that ties into what we were saying about Helen learning and cobbling together personality. I wouldn't be surprised if that is something she picked up from like the orphanage woman talking to like a little kid.
I don't know. I think being cutesy like that is part of her Helen ishness.
Miss? Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did think a lot of this stuff about like when they were talking about making her be the second victim of the imaginary monster,
Uh huh.
and part of her arguments was that she doesn't feel pain the way the others do.
Yeah.
Uh, and then she was like perfectly willing to like gouge her eye out, it looked like, in
Mm hmm.
order to make a point.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was wild
Uh
and
huh.
very cool.
I agree.
And
I don't have
yeah,
much to say about it, just except that it's like, okay, Helen is just
yep,
Helen.
yep, yeah. And then she uses the term "silly Billy" in like the same sentence as
Yes.
threatening to
It's
cut
like,
her
it
eye
won't
out.
be so bad, silly Billy. Or
Yes,
whatever, yeah.
yep.
Alright. And I just also, unless there's something else you want to say about Helen,
No,
I wanted to mention Lillian, proof again that she's still fairly naive. She's like, Cecil's nice. Like, don't say bad things about Cecil, he's nice. And it's like, no, he's slimy and patronizing and condescending. None of those are actually nice. He's able to put on a little bit of a nice front, but
see,
like,
I still disagree with you and Malia and think that Cecil is actually a nice guy who's just a little bit dumb.
I don't know.
And I mean, probably he's like nice to certain people and less nice to other people, or might depend on like, I don't know, whatever. But I think Lillian might genuinely only have seen the nice side of Cecil anyway.
But she saw the same sides that Side did and Lacey did.
What, the fact that he wanted to hang out with her because he thought she was pretty?
Well, the fact that he like didn't address her when he said those things.
Yeah, that was like one line. I don't think,
There's a
and like Lillian has been working at the academy, like she's attending the academy. Presumably, Cecil is like one of her teachers at some point, or
I don't think I think he's more like a postdoc.
sure, but postdocs like do lectures
Sure,
sometimes,
yeah, fair enough.
um, or
Um,
whatever. So I assumed that Lillian knows Cecil already
maybe.
and is saying that he's nice because she has interacted with him before and has seen him be nice on many occasions. And the fact that his attempts to flirt with Lacey were very
Slimy
clumsy,
and patronizing and gross.
I would call them clumsy and ineffective. But sure. Um, I feel like that would probably not be sufficient to counteract Lillian's previous impression of Cecil from the many years that they have been at the academy together.
Sure. Um,
Because I don't think they've had enough time to decide whether he's actually nice or anything so far,
other than just dumb.
other than just dumb. I think he's just dumb. I think he's well
It's,
meaning and dumb.
you're probably right.
I mean, you could be right too. Like we're like both, we're
Mm.
both entitled to have different opinions about this guy. I just don't get the impression of him being like,
I don't think he's malicious.
okay,
I just think he's not nice.
okay,
Like, I don't think he's actively malicious.
okay.
Um, so I am being called to do a bedtime routine. Do you mind taking like a 15-20 minute break here before we move on to Mauer?
Sure, we might take longer than that because I'm gonna have to walk the dog as well.
Okay, just ping me when you're back.
Yeah, yeah. Even if we have to do this like some other day, then that's fine. We'll do whatever we need to do.
I mean, would you want to finish tomorrow? That
I would want to finish this evening, but I'm
me
just
too.
saying
But
if we can't,
okay,
then that's fine.
all right. Just ping me when you're ready.
Yeah, I'm going to stop the recording and we'll start a new recording
Sure,
next time. And yeah,
sounds good.
perfect. All right, see you later.
Thank you. Bye. In a
Bye.
bit. Doot.
And we're back.
Great. All right. So you ready to move
Sam,
on to
you're,
other people?
yeah.
You were saying
Bailey is
something.
in bed.
Sorry. Yep.
Basil is in prison. Dog has been walked. Let's talk about Reverend Maurer.
Mauer. All right. So,
Go ahead.
um, you you specifically separated in our notes here his wall decor from his whole thing about symbols and rituals, and I'm kind of curious as to why you did that. Because in my mind, that whole memorial, for lack of a better word, very much is a symbol, is it not?
Yes, and it's because I didn't think of
Oh, okay.
it. Because originally I thought of putting the stuff about the decoration, the military honors, the cross on the wall
Hmm.
under like the location section where we're talking about the church building.
Okay.
And so then I just moved it under Bauer. Didn't think of integrating it into the symbols and ritual stuff. But we can start with the symbolism and ritual stuff because I think that's a important part of
Who he is.
important part of who he is, and there's kind of a lot of
Hmm.
reference to that in that chapter. It kind of starts out with the discussion of titles where they're calling him Sir, and he says,
Hmm.
"I've heard the word Sir enough for one lifetime. Father works, but I'm not too fond of that either." Um,
Yeah.
Also, like, he's not too fond of that, but now everybody calls him Father now, and
I wonder. There's a part of me who wonders if it's like this sort of attempt to appear a man of the people type of deal. Like,
sure,
I'm
yeah,
just one of you. I don't. These titles, they don't mean anything because I am just like you. I'm not special. I'm not. I'm no one. I'm no one special. I am just like you. So when I die, it's like one of you die, or
yeah.
tying into our whole martyrdom thing earlier in his concept or his appeal to martyrdom, I guess.
hmm Yeah, making himself more relatable for sure.
I mean, isn't that what like
Um,
all those the youth pastors do? I'm Pastor Dave and I'm cool and I'm going to play guitar in youth group or whatever.
yeah, um, yeah, and this is that's probably not appropriate at this time and age to be like we don't even know this guy's first name. Have you noticed
Yeah,
that his
that is
first name hasn't
true.
come up? Um,
That is a good point. I had not noticed that, but
do we want to make up a first name? Do you want to try and guess what his first name will turn out to be?
his first name is Father, which is why he doesn't like it. I don't know why, but I have a J in my head. Jason or James. No, we already have a Jamie. It doesn't seem right to have two.
It might be the influence of the whole Reverend thing, but I have an R. I'm thinking like Richard or something.
Richard Mauer, Roderick Mauer,
Robert.
Ruiz. If it is the Spanish crown.
Yes. Rodrigo. Rodrigo Mauer.
Yep, that definitely.
That's his official name now.
Rodrigo.
Yeah. So like, if it was today and he was trying to be like folksy and relatable, he'd probably just go by his first name. So,
Yeah,
like,
exactly. I think that's that same
just
kind of.
call me Rodrigo sort of thing.
Yeah.
And probably father is as close as get. Like he might say, just call me like Mr. Mauer or something.
Yeah, like the informality.
Yeah.
But like with bounds.
Mm-hmm.
And the word "sir," enough for one lifetime, is clearly just referring to his military service.
That's what I got to. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then he kind of elaborates more on his thoughts towards symbolism and ritual.
Yeah.
He says the symbols aren't important to him. I'll just quote it because, again, Wild Boy's better at wording it than I am. The symbols aren't so important to me, not in that way. I believe in simple and fundamental truth. I've seen people in my position try to give counsel to the suffering with fancy words and high concepts, with symbols and rituals. It felt hollow, and I told myself I wouldn't do that to others.
And the thing is, I think there's a disconnect between, because he clearly either is doing that, giving comfort with symbols and rituals via the serving the tea, making the tea, doing that whole thing. That's clearly very much a ritual, even if it's not like a uppercase religious ritual.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know if it's him trying to find comfort in these kinds of smaller acts of ritual, or if it's he's giving counsel to the suffering with symbols and ritual. In theory, Cy and Mary and Lacey and all them are people coming to him for comfort.
Uh-huh. I think that I've definitely heard this sort of attitude before in real life. When it comes to like different attitudes towards like religion and worship, where it's like some have more symbolism and ritual and some have a lot less. And this kind of idea comes up a lot, where it's like these fancy words and high concepts. They're hollow. They don't mean anything, and we want to go straight to the simple and fundamental truths. Whereas other people would see it as, no, these symbols are comforting. These symbols are something that we can like adopt and use them to try and like
find
kind
comfort,
of guide us to the simple and fundamental truths. So definitely both approaches are valid, and both approaches speak more to different people.
Yeah.
And so I kind of just got the impression that Mauer is one of those people who tried the whole like more symbolic and ritualistic approach to things and didn't like it as much.
Or it was applied to him after the war, during the war.
Sure. Because I think both the military and the church have rich traditions of symbolism and ritual.
And I think his aversion to ritual probably is the same reason he has an aversion to the word sir, because he's been through an institution where they matter a lot and was left scarred by it. So he cares far more about the small scale, personal level acts of faith and affirmation, and again, serving the tea, which is a very small scale ritual on a much more personal level than, in theory, I'm blanking on the word. I was hoping to have it faster. Wow, how am I blanking on this? The wine and bread in Catholic Church.
Yeah.
What's that called?
The Eucharist?
Yes. I was kind of drawing a bit of there's a lot. I guess I've sort of been skirting around the sort of Christ metaphor for Mauer a bit throughout this episode.
Okay.
And I'm really diving into it here.
Sure. Go for it, because I haven't explored that with one single thought yet, so I'm interested to hear your take.
And
if you want.
I don't have it like coherent enough to be comfortable really going deeply into it, but I felt that a lot of what Mauer's plan. Well, I guess it's going back to to my thought about him wanting to be a martyr, to be this story, this like this idea that people can come around to tear down the 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 academy. And I haven't really made a cohesive thought or coherent thread to tie that to what I was saying about like comparing the serving of the tea to like a Eucharist in terms of like a big act of faith versus a small act of faith, like a big ritual versus like a small, more personal one.
Okay.
Like I don't think any of that has made any sense, probably. But
I mean, I sort of get the gist of maybe where you're going with that.
like I said, I haven't articulated it fully.
Sure.
So
Sure.
maybe next week or next episode,
Yeah.
I'll have it more in
Mhm.
mind.
Yeah. I mean, you probably could make a good comparison in that way. I'm not really seeing it with the tea
Well, I'm
service
not
necessarily
specifically.
specifically,
I'm not.
but
I'm not. I'm not saying that like, oh, the tea is his blood and the cookie is his bread or whatever. But
yeah.
I'm just. I was sort of tying this small act of like ritual comfort to like the larger act of ritual comfort that the Eucharist is meant to be.
Mhm. Yep.
I
Yeah,
kind of
I can
wish
see that.
Malia was also still in this episode here because I feel like you and her probably would have more to say about that than I do, both of you being more tied into like Catholicism than I am.
Sure. I think that in this case, like I haven't really thought about it much, and maybe we can see if it comes up more. We'll keep an eye out and see
Yeah.
if like this sort of.
And frankly, I'm talking about like Catholicism and all that, but for all we know, this is some Protestant denomination and
So
or Anglican.
I'm fairly like given the historical and political situation, I would be genuinely surprised if he wasn't whatever this story's equivalent of Anglicanism is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I've been kind of just assuming that
I
he's
think
like
that's a
the
safe
the
assumption.
the Church of England or the Church of the Crown or
Yeah.
whatever. Um, you know, there's a lot of similarities, a lot of differences, but I think that yeah, as far as like attitudes towards ritual, like
Yeah, it's similar.
even in Anglicanism, like there is this really big uh, I want to say divide, but it's not really a divide. It's just like there's these two traditions, like the high church
In the
tradition
low church, yeah.
where they have all those symbols and rituals
Hmm.
and whatever, and the low church tradition where they uh, don't focus as much on the symbolism and rituals so much and try and
Yeah.
be more simple and fundamental. Um,
Well, I mean,
and so
that's
like
I can
seeing
go ahead.
Maurer go for like a more low church approach to this just seems very in keeping with what I would expect from an Anglican priest at the
Well,
time. It just
well,
sounds
especially a populist
realistic.
Anglican priest.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I absolutely expect the Archbishop or whatever of Canterbury attending to the crown is, or sorry, the Archbishop of Barcelona or whatever attending to the crown is is probably far more into these big acts of performative faith and display.
hmm Yeah, because it would come with the role,
Yeah,
presumably.
exactly.
hmm Yeah, but I definitely like just I think boiling it down to the simple fundamental truth. I feel like this is what it really
Is
comes down to here is just Maurer. He was in
mhm,
the military. He kind of got fed up
scarred.
with or like post traumatic response to these
Yeah.
ritualistic things, and was just like this is really dumb, and he kind of moves away from that, but he still like has these like sort of tea rituals either as like he's still holding on to some like creature comfort for himself, but I think more likely he recognizes that even if he prefers to go to like the
Austere and
source, the austere and like himself personally, he recognizes that these sorts of rituals are beneficial for people, and so he knows like if he does this little ritual of tea, he's like he can kind of make the lambs and their friends more comfortable and provide this ritual for them and kind of just structure their conversation, even though he himself um,
mhm,
would prefer to not kind of go through the motions, but he
Yeah.
recognizes that sometimes the motions can be beneficial, and serving tea is one of those cases where the motions are beneficial.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you there.
Mhm.
The
And like the cross on the wall that's beat up and he thinks
mhm,
belongs to Mauer, like, I would assume that it's beat up because he had it with him in the war or
I
something.
assume so, which
Yeah.
implies that he's been a man of faith, at least in up
Mhm.
until even before the war.
Maybe he was an army chaplain. I don't know if they have army chaplains in this world, but who
Maybe.
knows?
But yeah,
But yeah, like, that particular symbol
or his
was important
father's.
to him, and it still is somewhat important to him. Like,
Yeah,
not just as a symbol of his faith, but like as a symbol of
personal
like
symbol.
a personal symbol and connection to this object that he's had with him for so long.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And I think it's important that this cross is kept on display in his office, in the rectory, rather than on display in the church.
Hmm.
It's the people who are going to see it are the people that
Yeah.
matter for whatever reason.
Hmm. Well, the church isn't about Mauer, but the
Exactly.
rectory is about Mauer. Like, that's
So,
his
yeah,
space, so
yeah.
that makes sense. Also, like, to tie in this wall decoration, like he says, like, these military honors are displayed in such a way that they're for the benefit of the people visiting and not for
Mhm.
Mauer's own benefit. And that kind of ties into what I was saying about how this ritual of the tea service is for the benefit of the people that
Yeah.
come to see him and not for
Well,
his own benefit.
and sort of tying into that, I think, is the way he keeps the arm hidden until the most dramatic moment to use it to make a point, like, oh, the academy is coming for us, is when he sheds the jacket that has the big overgrown sleeve and reveals the arm, sort of like reminding the people, look what the academy has done to us and
Hmm.
can do to us.
Hmm. Yeah, he definitely, for all,
Understands.
yeah, he understands how to use like these metaphors and symbolism
Hmm.
for rhetorical purposes. Absolutely. So, like,
I think far better than Sai does.
yes, clearly.
Yeah.
um, yeah. In other things to talk about with regard to Mauer, I mean, the arm, we finally saw his arm, and it
Yeah.
was more grotesque than just being big. Because
Yep.
that's what it was said at first. What
It
Jamie
was
said,
just like,
it was
oh, it's
just like
just like
it's
a
big.
someone, it was an ill-adjusted arm stitched onto
Mhm.
his, but no, it's like vines and fungus and wood and like splitting flesh.
Mhm. Yeah. Um, yes, we've never seen somebody with arms that are made of wood in this
No.
uh, author's over before.
Nope. Nope. Never.
Um, yeah, so that's super interesting, and you could definitely see why he would keep it hidden. And
Oh yeah.
yeah,
And use it as a point of emphasis.
mhm, definitely. I also thought it was worth pointing out his paranoia. We kind of touched on it before.
Mhm.
We saw that he had the pebbles, that he had coins on the doors stacked in a certain order, so that if the door was disturbed, then he
Yeah.
would know. Um,
And I liked that Sai was like, oh, because he's suspicious and paranoid, and Jamie's like, yeah, but also he just came from, not just, but he was in the war where it makes sense to have been paranoid
mhm,
and
mhm.
suspicious.
Yeah. And, if he's setting himself up against the Academy, then he also has very good reason to be
Oh, absolutely.
paranoid and suspicious. So, yeah. And I wonder if it is. Yeah. So I don't think it is actually like paranoia in like a.
It's not paranoia if they're actually out to get you.
Yeah, exactly. I,
Yeah,
I think that it's like just sensible
I absolutely agree.
precautions for
Yeah.
him.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
presumably he's been working at this plan for a long time,
Hmm.
and it makes sense to have set up precautions ahead of time.
Hmm. Yeah. He's probably been working on this idea since the wars.
Yeah,
Since losing faith with
crown.
the crown as an institution, and
Yeah,
yeah,
for sure. Um,
that's all I had to say about Mauer. But
yeah, I put this here. I meant to put this in the Sai section. Maybe you can explain this line to me. When Sai's trying to rile up people, I'm pretty sure this is just Sai. Okay, yeah. Let me, for the audience. I had lost cachet with this particular section of the crowd, and I would have to go. And he says, "I'll have to go start somewhere else." But
mhm,
this was just after a woman ruffles his hair, and
yeah,
like, my read on that is that Sai saying I had lost cachet with this bit of the crowd is him being like a cat upset that he's been pet and he's going to go somewhere else because he was touched and he didn't want to be touched, rather than any actual loss of respect or cachet from the crowd?
No, I think he was right, because if the people around him were actually responding the way he wanted them to, they would be panicking and heading for the doors. Whereas the fact that they're like, "Oh, there, there, little boy, it'll be okay," and he's like, "Okay, this is not working."
Well, I thought that, like, of course someone is going to try to comfort a little boy even if they're all panicking. It's like, oh, it's empathy, you know?
It is empathy, but it's just like it's not the response he was
Sure.
going for, and so he's just going to try again
Fair
somewhere
enough.
else.
Fair enough.
Yeah,
Fair
I don't think he was specifically responding to being patted on the head and being like, "Oh, how dare you!" Although that is rather funny.
It is. That's kind of how I read it. Just because it's Psy. But to be
Yeah,
fair, it could well be all of them.
yeah,
All of those things.
yeah, yeah. So let us move on to the next section.
Which is our discussion question.
Yes. So I was thinking, because I forgot to put the discussion question in the episode description last time, and we only got one response, and it was a really good discussion question. So I'm kind of inclined to continue on with the same one.
I'm all for that. Since we didn't really think of a good discussion question aside for maybe name the academy.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But yeah,
I'm
like,
still I'm still sticking with the
oh, I agree with you.
Royal
It's
Academy
better.
of etc. Yeah, I did want to bring up the previous discussion question, when we were talking about what other body parts correspond to features of the Academy,
Huh?
and we recorded our episode like a week before we released it because I am a very slow editor. Um,
It's the natural ebb and flow of a podcast recording. It's fine.
yeah, so we did get a response after we recorded from Kat, which was really great. That I wanted to call out. So
Cat
Kat,
spelled QATT, not CAT.
no, QATTT.
TTT,
Yes, many teas.
not CAT, though.
Yes, the sort of cat that would enjoy having a tea party with Mauer, perhaps. Much tea.
All right, so what was Cat's answer?
Anyway, yes, we'll stop making fun of Cat's name. It's a great username. Uh, Cat says this is one feature of the Academy often forgotten about. The appendix. It's a relatively useless part of the Academy. It probably does something minor, like non-warfare creations, maybe a tad bit of machines, but that might be too good for it. Anyways, what is important is that it explodes, either metaphorically or physically, maybe both, damaging everything about it and causing massive pains for the Academy, forcing the lambs to do cleanup. No, I'm not still mad at the appendicitis I got 7 years ago. You are. But in the end, it's better that it was removed, at least for the Academy.
So the appendix is Nim, right? Where the wise rats were housed?
Yes. That took them 3 weeks to clean up.
Yep.
Yes.
All right, so
I,
what
I
was
thought that
our...
was I thought that was a great
Oh, I
answer.
like that answer a lot. It's a really
Mhm.
good answer. And I really like it because it kind of fits into the themes, I think, of some of what we've seen so far. It's like, oh, the lambs are part of a project that's the rest of the academy kind of discounts, kind of like an appendix.
Mhm.
But if it goes bad, then it could cause a lot of problems.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
what was our discussion question, our new discussion question from last week?
Yes. So the discussion question is slash was, tell us an example of a story, or like, yeah, a story in which the protagonists have some trait which is both an advantage and a disadvantage at the same time, like how
So,
the
the
lambs
lambs, yeah.
are children, and this is advantageous to them because they're able to infiltrate easily and fly under the radar, but it's also a disadvantage because people don't take them seriously and so forth. Yeah,
Yeah,
I thought it
perfect.
was just a great discussion
I
question.
really
So we're
liked
going to
it.
keep
Yeah.
on going with that answer.
Recommend things to us, please.
Yes, we haven't referenced enough literature in this episode yet, so tell us more things to add to our list.
All right.
Yeah,
Anything else you'd like to cover before the end of the episode?
go right ahead.
Cool. All right. So, everyone, thank you for listening. We hope you'll continue along with us for this trip into Twig. You can read it alongside us at twigserial.wordpress.com. And if you do, and even if you don't actually listen to us and decide to read other things, please go to Wildbow's Patreon at patreon.com/wildbow and support him. With Pale coming to its conclusion, um, we need to encourage Wildbow to find something else to write.
Yes.
Also, please leave your answers to our discussion question in our Reddit thread or our Discord thread, which is still in the Doof network, or the Doof Discord, where we are still squatting.
Yes. I like how we say it's still there, like as if we were ever going to like.
Eventually, they'll evict us. There's going to be a
um,
point where squatters' rights mean they can't, though.
yes, we've got to dig in and take root.
Yep.
Yeah. You can reach us at totwigpodcast@gmail.com. totwigpodcast on the platform formerly known as Twitter. Reddit thread in r/parahumans. The discussion thread in the Doof Discord, as we mentioned. You can send the answers to your discussion questions or any comments that you have, or submissions to our totally legit and official competition for the
Yes,
Monster
yes,
Hunter.
please. I
which
want
is
to.
which is a totally legitimate contest and not a lazy attempt at crowdsourcing.
It's a contest, and you get prizes of exposure.
Next episode, we're covering Cat Out of the Bag 2.9 and 2.10.
Great. And you found a really cool biology fact.
Yes.
So take it
So,
away.
if you hang out on certain parts of the internet, you're probably familiar with this popular fun fact, which is that the body plan of a crab is so successful that several types of organisms have evolved to take the shape of a crab over time. This is known as carcinization. It's happened at least 5 times in 2 different types of organisms, all of which are types of crustaceans. So
No mammalian
yes,
crabs, no
it,
lizard
yeah,
crabs, no bird crabs.
yes, it's pretty specific. Like, it sounds, when you see it on Reddit or YouTube or wherever, it's usually presented as like, oh, all these different
Everything becomes a
creatures
crab.
becomes a crab, and there's like, any creature, if you give it enough time, it'll eventually become a crab. All
Not
of these creatures had kind of a sort of lobster type shape or shrimp type shape, where it's kind of more long and thin, and then it became short,
oblong.
squat, and whatever, like a crab. But that's not the interesting part. That's an interesting fact already, but everybody knows that fact because I
The
assume that our audience is all in the exact same Reddit threads that I hang out in because anyway.
safe assumption.
So
They are
that's the boring fact. The interesting fact that I didn't learn about until last week is that this also happens in reverse. At least 7 groups of organisms that we know of have undergone decarcinization. Their ancestors had crab shapes, but they no longer have crab shapes. So those people who said everything will eventually become crabs is wrong.
but
Some of the things will stop being crabs and become lobsters again.
but then they might go back to crab.
Yes, because this is exceptionally fascinating. There is at least one species we know of that has undergone both carcinization and decarcinization, and that is the king crab. The king
Tasty,
crab,
tasty, tasty king crab.
yes, the king crab is related to hermit crabs. Hermit crabs, are
No,
decarcinized.
interesting.
Their ancestors were crab shaped, and then they evolved into being more oblong and soft, and that's why they have to hide in shells that they find. So hermit crabs are decarcinized, and then king crabs, which are part of that hermit crab group,
Hmm.
recarcinized again, adopting the crab shape.
That's
So,
really fascinating.
yeah, evolution is always more complicated and interesting than you think it will
Yeah.
be.
And
Um,
unlike most of our fun facts, you actually sourced this one. So I'm assuming you'll leave that in the show notes.
yes, I was looking to try and find out which groups of crustaceans in particular had undergone carcinization, and I found some lists, but it ended up not being very interesting because it was like, oh yes, like twice among this genus that has some name that no one will recognize, and I'm like, that's not interesting. So anyway, but I
Fair
do
enough.
have the study, the 2021 study in which they were studying the evolutionary behavior of these crab body
Hmm.
plans and described that the carcinization and decarcinization and essentially their conclusion was honestly many groups are kind of halfway decarcinized, so it's not really helpful to think of them as carcinized or decarcinized. It's more like they are somewhat carcinized or
It's a
partially.
spectrum.
It's a spectrum, exactly.
Yeah.
Um,
It's
yeah.
not like
So
everybody wakes up as a crab one morning.
yes. So anyway, super fascinating stuff,
That
and I
is
hope
really cool.
you thought so as well.
I certainly did. All right. Anything
Uh,
else you want to say about crabs or
they are
parasites? Or
delicious.
they are tasty.
Parasites.
Less
I mean,
so.
I'm sure some parasites are delicious, but
I can't think of
so
any
so
parasites that one just. That's a lie. I do know of one parasite that people eat. And it is, I don't remember the name, but it is a fungus that infests corn. And it is supposedly delicious. But a lot of people don't know that it is, so let me look up real quick. Well, that's not a pleasant name. It's called
well,
corn smut.
I mean,
But
people don't eat
oh,
smut. Smut is not good.
Huitlacoche is the name in
Right.
Mexico.
So
Um, Go ahead.
isn't most fermented products
It's not parasitic though.
isn't it?
Fermentation isn't parasitic.
Well, I guess not because the thing that's being fermented isn't alive.
Yeah, but
But
like I just shared a picture in the Discord. Uh, it's corn husk, and then it's the corn is alive, and this fungus consumes it, and it is apparently very good. I have a cousin who is very into mycology and mushrooms and collecting mushrooms. I've gone out in the woods a number of times with him. He's really knowledgeable. And he says that in Mexico and parts of the southern US, this is a delicacy. It's impossible to buy. It's so expensive, and like a lot of farmers don't even sell it because it's so good. They just reserve it for themselves, or they sell it for like really high prices at restaurants. But in Quebec, which is where we're both based, my cousin and I, farmers don't know that it's delicious, and they just see it as like this gross thing growing on corn. So like often you can just go to like a farm with corn and ask them about it, and they'll just like, yeah, take it. I don't want it. Get rid of it. No,
hmm, that's fascinating.
that is a parasite that one eats.
Yeah, I'm looking on the internet. It points out that pea crabs
Uh huh.
are parasitic and also delicious.
Pea crabs.
Yes.
Oh, I don't know it at all. Oh, that looks. Oh, they're in oysters?
Yeah. It says George Washington was a fan of pea crabs. He loved them in his oyster stew.
Interesting. I would not have. Interesting. I feel like if I were to open up an oyster and see a crab in it, I would have, like, removed the crab,
Yes.
but that's just me.
Yeah. Anyway,
Okay,
something for all
interesting.
of you culinary folks to think about.
Yeah, I am going to be doing more research on parasites that one eats.
Yes.
'Cause that
And
sounds
knowing
fun.
you and your love for culinary experimentation, I'm sure
You'll
that will end
be
up on your table very soon.
you'll be visiting soon.
Oh
Not to
dear.
imply you're the parasite that I am eating. I will make you food.
Yes. All right.
All right.
Well, I think that is all for today. So
I
thank
think
you all
so.
for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.
Absolutely. Have a good night, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
All right.
Do, do,
It's
do,
recording.
do, 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 do.
There's also like these clips. Can you hear that?
Yeah? Is that just like intrinsic to
That's like
Zencaster?
inside Zencaster. Yeah.
Oh, cool. You should be doing like the old school shock jockey type thing, preparing noises to play at the.
Yeah. It's an idea. Some Monster Corner intros and stuff.
Yep. That'd be fun, actually.
Okay.
All right.
Back to the script.
Yep.